Evening, everyone. Let's welcome. I welcome you to Q&A. So already there is questions that I have that you asked. So this Q&A is open for the question of the classes that were done today. So let's have a word of prayer. Dear loving God, we thank you for the evening. We thank you for the great care that you've taken onto us. Surrounding that we want to be. That your work in this guide us so in Jesus' name. Amen. Do we have any questions to Emma? Any questions? Yes. Yeah, Effie?
It's a clarification. Because so I want to affect Emma to repeat the point about why Republicans or the Republican parties are considered people's. So this is a question of mine. And it's a thing you mentioned it. So yeah, so why are they considered gatekeepers and gatekeepers of what exactly? And what is the role of the Democrats, like the Democratic Party, if the Republicans are that's just practically maybe don't.
Yeah. So the question is, why the Republican Party are the gatekeepers, and they are gatekeepers of what? And what is the role of Democratic Party? Any further question? You're done? Okay. Is there any question? So Emma? No question? No question. Question to Brian? Other than those that were being asked in the afternoon, do we have any other questions to Brian? Okay, so I think we can start with
Guys, I have one. In the diagram he's put on the board, what would he put between? He's put feminism in 2001 to 2024 and seventh kingdom to COP. What would he put from 1989 to 2001?
Okay. Any questions? You're good. Yes, I am considering what we have. We have in the morning. Yes, yes. So, yeah, in the afternoon, yeah. Yes, I have to hear. So you can pick up the someone's question. Just
So what's the first one? I think she says there was some from yesterday.
Yes. So there was a question that was asked about the institution and the individual. Now that God is focusing on the individual, institution, not individual, why then the movement, when an individual has committed, for example, takes his act, why is the movement going to send that person?
Why is the movement going to sense that person if they can intersect us that?
Yeah,
It's about the movement then. So I think the question is, if the movement is about an institution, why are we censoring individuals who are sexist if it's not about the individual? So someone else like to answer that? What are your thoughts? So if anyone's got any, Jack.
I think, like we say, The movement is an organization with a set of laws and rules. And the members of the movement are required to follow those rules and regulations. If a person is a sexist, we understand that we are not supposed to do it. And to possess an identity is right. Those are the regulations are due from this kingdom of God. Yeah, that's one thing. And that's something.
So Jackie said this is a movement with a set of rules and regulations which we're supposed to adhere to, so that there are still, I'm going to put words in a mouth, there are still consequences when you break them, but there should be consequences. No.
Well, just to add on that, I don't think if those just it's retaliating what telling us those people perhaps censored, they are not censored based on individual's perspective, basically. Yeah. But now you can join on the set of rules that govern the movement, not an individual's. It's not like Elder Emma's perspective of what that individual should do, or maybe Elder so and so on what that individual should do. It's based on, I think, the movement's perspective in terms of the truths that basically we propagate.
Yeah. So it's based on the truths we propagate. It's not based on the individual or me as an individual censoring someone. It's the movement as a collective saying this isn't acceptable behavior, basically. So I think there's two things about this is a real struggle for people. So we get why there's questions on it and just keep asking. I don't think we can have enough questions on this topic in a way, because we've thought for so long that salvation is on an individual basis and it's on certain qualities, certain sins. And now we're shifting our view of sin, basically. And we're saying, okay, so this was when we were children, and now that we're adults, God is not looking at those things, and maybe God never was looking at those things. So we've got this perspective from Ellen White in the Bible, which is very much focused on individuals and their actions. And we're shifting it now to creating a culture in a movement. And so we've been talking about the seventh kingdom, and we've been talking about the fact that governments and leaders have responsibility to shape a culture, and that they have power to do that. So they're more accountable, more responsible to shape the culture of the society or of this movement if they're in a leadership position. And on a bigger scale, we're going to be in a leadership position in terms of heaven when it comes to governance. But as a movement, we're learning how to relate to one another when we disagree, when we see things we don't like, when there's differences between us. And that is part of what's going on right now. So we've shifted our focus from looking at, we've learned, I think we've grown, that reform vows were there to help us, protect us, guide us, but we've always made everything connected to salvation. And I think that's been a mistake. So there's a constant fear of, if I do this, I'm going to be lost. If I don't do this, I won't be saved. You know, that whole narrative is really not conducive to faith and trust. So you're not conscious when you grow up as a child, and I keep going back to the child parent, because we should go from the known to the unknown. Each of us has family, and we know that we want to have mercy most of the time. I know that people in families do horrible things, but most of the time we want to protect our own. We want to be nice to our own and look after our owners. And as we're nurturing children and raising them, you're disciplining them and trying to get them to be good, upright citizens. And that should be the purpose. So we're not beating for no reason. We're not beating, actually. We shouldn't be beating. But I know there's a culture we're in here where that's a strong part of the culture. And so we need to reset those things and say, okay, so what are we doing? We're training the child to become autonomous, to become an adult, to be responsible, to behave responsibly, not because we're standing over them with the big stick, but because they recognize that's the best thing to do. So God's saying, okay, when I try to teach you, obedience is a good thing. Let's be obedient. But we need to grow out of that and say, okay, so now I need to choose for myself what's the right thing to do. And the main thrust of our message right now and the movement is equality. But that is part of patriarchy and headship and the sin that we're dealing with. So that is the sin of the fathers, in a sense. So we're going to censor for that sin because that's significant. It's going to change the culture of the movement. And it's causing harm to others if you're abusive. So that is something we would censor for. But we've recognized that things like the health message, music, dancing, all those things we've touched on are lifestyle issues, and they're not the same level of sin. And they're not considered to be salvational issues. They're good advice. And I don't think we're even saying they're sin. in that sense. So just because something's sin, not sin, or how level of sin, doesn't mean we should go out and do it or not do it. So what we need to do now is say, if this is good advice, why don't we want to do it? And be directed by what we know is good for us and good for others. What's going to create a culture of a kingdom that you want to live in? And it's not the culture where we're going around looking at each other's plates going, you shouldn't be eating that, or why are you wearing that? We don't want to be in that kind of culture. It's not friendly. It's not relaxing. It's very judgmental. It divides people. So we want to be in a culture which says, I love you, even though I don't agree with you, I don't understand you, I've never had your experience, but I accept you as you are, and I want to learn. I want to know about you. I'm interested. So is that, what culture would you want to live in? And that's what we're trying to create. So yes, we're censoring for sexism, and I'm sure censor for stealing or, you know, breaking the other 10 commandments which harm others, and we still not saying you should go out and break them. We've created a foundation in the movement and we're building on it. So just because, I know there was a question earlier about if this is equality in this dispensation, does that mean it's not anywhere else? But we're building a structure, and this is part of the foundation. So we're not, just because we're going to the seventh kingdom here now, doesn't mean we throw out equality. We're building the seventh. We're building on the information. We don't have to be told it anymore. We know that's the standard and we practice it. So why do we have to keep going over the same thing when it comes to things we already know? So has that answered the question? I don't know who asked that question. Did anyone have a follow-up comment or thought? Nick, you in?
I'm not sure whether this is the 8 members who are saying who are perfect in their characters.
Did you say not sure whether they were perfect?
Whether they were perfect or
Are you not sure?
the sons,
Yes. Don't you know they were not perfect? We're afraid to say that. Ham gets off the ark and he's drinking alcohol, and there's all that problems.
But they were because they were inside the ark.
Inside the ark.
And I think that makes sense the movement because it's a collective. And how people individually not meet a certain threshold of dismissing them from being safe. When they all don't do them, fundamental or the core values of that movement, which would eventually set up like that. And I think when someone is baptized, you are required not to see anymore.
What does that mean to you, Nick? So Nick says when someone's baptized, they're required not to sin anymore. What does that look like?
Because you can see the justified process of sanctification also. You are justified. And therefore,
You're justified. So you're required not to sin anymore. You're going to walk sanctified now.
required not to
What does that look like?
essentially both there. Practicing acts as transition of getting on because what is a symbol of waters, washing ourselves, and therefore you become in always. I think that's a requirement. And therefore people force think it's their experience, but they could succeed and they could find salvation as well. Because pitfalls after that, even though the statement is you're supposed to not sin.
So the statement says you're supposed not to sin. You're already saying, but you could fall and you can still go to heaven. So you're accepting that logic.
Yeah, so when you go to the New Testament, individual,
So
from that point,
So this it's a really hard thing to shift. So you say we've not really changed our model in the sense that salvation is saving from sin. So now we have to say, what's the sin? The basic principles of sin, or the principles of the 10 Commandments, are love God and love your neighbor. So we're creating a culture where we love God and love our neighbor. So when we get out of the baptismal pool, we're saying, I've signed up to a kingdom of equality. This is the kingdom I want to be part of, and this is the kingdom I want to help build. So as far as I can, I'm not going to cause harm to my neighbor. I'm going to love them. And I'm going to not be a stumbling block to others on that level. I'm going to practice equality. So that's the essence of the movement. And what that looks like is accepting people and loving them, whatever stage of the journey they're on, whatever growth issues they have, whatever problems they have, supporting them through that and helping to change. So we've got to shift our definition of sin. So sin is now to break that culture. And if you break that culture or you cause harm to your neighbor, there will be consequences, and you will be called to justice on that. So in a perfect world, they would have laws that are to be kept, and they follow through consistently. If you don't keep them, you abuse your wife, you're going to get a penalty, whatever that penalty is. And hopefully the penalty isn't, we're going to lock you up and throw away the key, because that's how we see rebuke. That's how we see censorship. It's like you're thrown out now and you can never come back in. The door's shut. You've closed your probation. That's how we process that kind of disciplinary action. But disciplinary action isn't for that. It's to restore the person, and it always was. So we don't put them in prison and throw them away. And that's partly why we've got such an issue, because one is governments don't follow through with justice properly in most parts of the world. They're not consistent. So people don't get brought to justice who shouldn't be. Then wrongs are done to people who shouldn't be. But the other thing is, what do you do when you bring them to, you put them in a prison with other bad people? They get treated badly. They don't get any help to reform. Some places they do. Obviously, there's reform programs. But the point is, they should be now re-educated and supported, counseled, because presumably they've got some issues if they've committed a serious crime. They've had childhood trauma. They've had abuse themselves. There's so many factors to it that now we should spend the time and energy to find out why they've done that and would they want to change. And hopefully, if you've got a culture where everybody wants to change and be good, or wants to attempt that culture, then they will fit into that and grow with it. I don't know what you do with someone who refuses and doesn't want to change. That's another story. I haven't got all the answers, but I know that if you create a culture with a government that implements law correctly, then you'll have a good society. So that's where we're headed for. So God, when you say sin, if you get angry with someone tomorrow and then you feel bad about it and you say, I'm sorry. I mean, the thing is, how are we defining sin now? If you get angry, you could argue you're doing harm with someone. If eating the reform vows have been a stumbling block to us because we're looking at those things and thinking we're sinning, but that's not sin. That's not the definition of loving God and loving your neighbor. It doesn't fit in the remit. So, and it's really hard to shift that, because then people start saying, well, what if I do this? Or what if I do that? And I said, keep thinking on an institutional level. How are you building the ark? How are you doing it? Because the ark is a good picture of the fact that God saved these 8 people in spite of their problems, not because of, and not a sinner can't just say, I'll do what I want then and get in. That's not the right attitude. So they went on there in spite of their problems. They had choices all the way along like us. They get off the ark. Maybe they were okay on the ark and they got, and then they made mistakes when they got off. We don't know, but it's clear they weren't perfect, all of them. And then you think, so I just see the mercy of God in that some people can be dragged along because there's enough people to say, we want to do it this way, and influence them positively. So I think we have to approach it from that angle, and not from, you mean, if I do this, I can get away with it, or they're coming with us and they do that. It's that kind of, where are you coming from with our questions? Don't we want God to be like our parents? So when we grow up, your parents aren't looking at you going, Nick, did you steal anything today? Have you done anything? Did you speak to someone badly? I'm going to tell you off. They're not constantly watching every action, writing it down and saying, Nick, you're a bad boy. It's like God doesn't want to deal with us on that level. Anyone else want to comment? I think if we shift our mindset into the fact that we're building this culture and that's what we're here for, then I think these questions will get answered. Some of the questions are still perhaps not being answered. I'm sure they're not. But we've got to consciously shift our mindset from individually analysing ourselves and our own salvation to looking at the group and what's good for the group collective. How do I want to be treated? Let me treat others how I want to be treated.
The next question is, you talked about Daniel chapter 2. I think you and each other. Yes, you can answer each other. And we see perfection in Daniel chapter 2.
Yes, so the question is, can we see perfection in Daniel chapter 2? And I think Itabo drew this, so perhaps he wants to answer this or answer it, but we've got the image in Daniel 2, and in that we know that's Satan's kingdom, but we've also got God's kingdom, which is the stone that is, the mountain with the stone being cut out. So that very imagery tells us that there's something about the mountain that's not fit for purpose, that the stone is now having to be cut out and separated to do a work on this image, to destroy the image and then set up another kingdom, as we spoke about. So there we can see that God is perfecting their kingdom in the stone. So it needs this this group of people to be taken out, the movement to do this work at the end of the world. So I think using parable methodology and juxtaposing those two things in that picture, we can see that if God's kingdom is doing that, it's by implication that Satan's kingdom is doing that. And if we bring Revelation 17 into it, and what we know about the seventh kingdom being completion and perfection, we can see that Satan is bringing their kingdom perfection the same way God is bringing their kingdom perfection. I don't know, Itabo, do you want to add anything to that? Yeah. No. Okay. So does that make sense? Is that your question, Jason? Does that make sense?
Just
Yeah.
in the statement in the propaganda says that Daniel 2 is the center of all prophecy. Get it wrong. We definitely have the wrong understanding of the whole comes right. So all the book of Revelation, the other book, and the whole sentence, then it is don't sound and very. So we can have a problem methodology. Stand Daniel 2. This concept of perfection, you can just see that there in summer before you really tell me other example.
Yeah. So saying Daniel 2 is the foundation of all prophecy. If you get that right, you can get the rest of Daniel Revelation right.
That is the reason why we don't find the reason. They will tell you, look at the church, the door, that's the mountain, God's kingdom in heaven. When you use methodology, you suddenly feel now. If their kingdom is here, even God's kingdom feel now. You can't change the program.
Yeah.
So the issue of perfection, you have to see in that.
Yeah, Roger.
Maybe a question. I don't know that question. But maybe to understand, what do they mean by perfect?
Oh.
Do they mean perfection in the sense of complete or perfection in the sense of good?
I'm not sure. Looking at the question, do you mean perfection in a sense of complete?
The sense of completeness.
The sense of completeness, the same as we've been saying about the seventh kingdom in Revelation 17. Yeah. So she means in a sense of completeness, not as in good.
That is the case that I think from Daniel 2. Because see that is giving us the complete history of the word from its beginning to its second. The word, the kingdom from this word. So if the imagery of the word is giving us the history of the word that is giving us, that has to be the same.
So it's giving us the history of the beginning and the end of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Do you want to comment on if she meant it was good? No. If she meant it was good, do you want to comment on that? No.
Yes. If it's good, we have a mountain from which a story starts. When we come to the image, you transfer that image, and I think verse 34-35, it's introduced the image of threshing wheat.
Yes.
So when you thresh wheat, you get something good and something bad. The wheat is good, the chaff is bad. If you compare and contrast, then the mountain is the equivalent of the chaff, the story is equivalent of the wheat. So the story samples.
Good. So it's shifting our idea of what the 144,000, what perfection and good looks like as well. So I think we have conceptualized that we have to be perfect in our characters, whatever that looks like. And as Nick was struggling to say that these people on the ark weren't perfect, because our concept is that to be saved, they had to be perfect, whatever that means, in their moral, difficult to say moral characters, but in their, yeah, our definition of perfection has changed, I think. That's why it's, if perfect means that they're assented to a culture and they're practicing a culture of equality, then yes, we've reached a stage of perfection where we recognize that God's government is the right type of government and what that government is.
Let me support that. If the Republican, why and the Republican Party being considered as the people? And
Okay. So why are the Republican Party the gatekeepers and what are they gatekeeping and what is the role of the Democratic Party? So I think in the book, if I remember rightly, this may have been from a presentation, but that both parties, in essence, the government is the gatekeeper, is the gatekeeper of democracy for the people to preserve that government in its proper state, in a quality government, not equality, but a good government. Is protected by the parties, and what's shown in the book is this polarization. When that polarization happens, it destroys the democracy. So that polarization is caused by a few things, but I suppose one of them is, I think he said, the disaffection of the people, the fact that there's problems in the kingdom, they're not happy with the current government, and as a result of that, they want someone to come along and save them out of the mess. And so, what tends to happen in history is that it was the Republican or the right-wing governments, the conservative governments who are conserving the status quo, who keep things ticking over on an even keel. Now, I don't know if someone else wants to add to this, but that's in essence why they're the ones that are more responsible, because when they capitulate to a populist or a leader that comes along and is far right, then they are ceasing to keep that party on that central position and defending the democracy in essence. So they're more responsible because they're the ones that tend to get these far right leaders that rise up in their ranks, or it seems to be from history. So I can't remember exactly why it's not the Democrats that aren't responsible, but they are responsible, they compromise. But because there's more emphasis of these types of leaders coming from the right, then the Republican Party is more responsible to preserve that democracy. So we're not saying the Democratic Party hasn't got a role to play. It has, and I think we've said that in the movement. They've compromised. They've just allowed the right to get away with things, and they haven't been diligent in affirming proper principles or laws that they should have done. And that's a really lay person's way of putting it. I don't know if anyone who's done more study on the politics of it could answer that better. Anybody want to add anything about why they're? Italo, do you want to say anything about why the Republican Party are gatekeepers? Any comment? No, I didn't think so.
Yeah, that answers. The Republicans and the Democrats, both of them, they are supposed they have the knowledge. They have to build. From it, they have to understand how its foundation is put in place. I don't think you can have an argument for that, they themselves, they are liable to make own decision. You take, for example, the current US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio used to be a good friend back in 2012 when he was, vying for the president. He was buying the Republican ticket, then Obama, with Obama. Marco Rubio was reasoning. He was internationalist. He had good policy. But now it's under Trump. He has really compromised. And there's this racial analysis. They show that the rule of law, there's a group of people, majority of them, they're not experts, but they have decided to before they go to Trump. But Marco Rubio has some sense. He has just decided to compromise. And even the Republicans have said, if they are willing to see that what they are doing is not right, but it's supposed to be done. And even to go to the history of World War II, the document that Helena shared with us, the warning for going like public. Those who allow people to come to power, they were also right. They knew the problem with Hitler. They had seen his behavior, but because they fear Hitler, they just allow Hitler to come. You can imagine if they could have restrained Hitler, such things like Holocaust could have happened, but so they just laid like that. They opened door for people, even though they were right.
they had sense, but they just choose the.
And they also reasoned, I think, that once he got in, they'd restrain him, they'd keep him under control. It was better to keep him close, kind of thing, because he was getting popular. And people were up, supporting him. Let's keep him on our side because we'll win the vote then, but then we'll restrain him once he's in. And they underestimated that, his character, just like Trump.
Because even in democracy, you cannot say that all of them can actually act as guardian, because right now we have the father, they also have problem in the head. So even in the right room, you can also see there's some good, like Marco Rubio, the problem they just choose to please so much.
And one of the issues with that as well is that if there is this polarization, so if there starts to be this big divide between both sides, they feel they've got to side with their party, then it entrenches them in a position of opposition and they can't actually work together to stop the dictator. So they're compromising by saying, we're Democrats, we're staying over here, and the Republicans are doing their thing, and then the dictator just gets away with things because the Democrats, in the past, Democrats and Republicans would have voted on the same side if they could see it was for the good of the Constitution and the democracy. But now they're not doing that.
I'm sorry to repeat mistake. Take for example, when Affordable Care Act was put in place by Obama. Sorry. Yes, just we passed on, I don't know which year.
Yes.
The one that Donald Trump used to mock to calling him Rhino, Republican by name. What was his name? John McCain.
I don't know, in connection with the Affordable Care Act, I'm not sure.
John McCain. Yes, John McCain. Yeah, he voted. He supported
Obama.
When Trump was in power, he wanted to remove that Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
But John McCain still with the Republican and say no, we have to protect the health of the people. So you can see even though you're the Republican, he had the sense of speak up is like
Yes. So that each one can still act as a guardrail if they choose to. Yeah. Okay.
Now, in the last time, you talked about what success looks like, the line of the ancient history. So if you was asking, you talked about organization for what made them success. So the question is it the only thing subject that you can look at, or there's other things that you can ask that history is successful?
Okay. So Effie asked if I made the point in the history of Christ or the disciples, John's line, that thing that made them successful, perhaps it was, I guess it was offering a thought, is that it was the fact that they organized and they provided a solid foundation for the Christian church, as opposed to that they went out and evangelized the world. So she's asking, is that the only criteria for success that we have? And I would say no. I think there's a few things that we've touched on in the movement over the years. One of them we know is organization, and it's essential to the organization, but we know methodology is just as essential. So we have to have the right methodology, the right way of interpreting truth or understanding truth, and for us to be a cohesive group. So you've got to understand the truth, you've got to have organization, which involves, I guess, finances, paying time, following the doctrines of the movement as an organization, and the leadership structure. So it's having respect for the leaders' decisions on things that we perhaps can't understand, or when people are censored, it's working with that and not against the system. So organization, methodology, and I think finance is part of that. There was something else. Anybody else want to add to that? So those are the primary things, I think, organization and methodology. Go on.
Yes.
So rules, I guess. Rules is part of organization or not? I think I would say it was part of organization. So the vows would fit into, I guess, both. Maybe it's more doctrine actually. The vows are more methodology and doctrine. Anybody else have any thoughts about those success? So if we look at those two things, I suppose we can go back and analyze the Moses and the Millerites, and see where did they actually go wrong? Why were they failures? And so we're looking at why Christ's one was a success. I think because they organization is key. And obviously they've come together on the belief that Christ is the Messiah, because that was their testing truth in that history. I don't know what else we'd want to add to that, but yeah, those are the two fundamental, I think, principles, methodology and organization to make success.
If our line under the is the line of success, it's the line of success, and guaranteed success. So what is the point of the test? The great test for the yet it is line of success, right?
So this is interesting. So she says, what is the point of the great test? If this is a line of success, and we know that it's definitely success, then what's the point of the test? I guess there's a couple of ways to answer this. Well, one of them I think is the fact that I really don't like the way we say test. Maybe we need to change it. But this whole idea that we're being tested, first of all, as individuals all the way along, it just feels like we have test after test after test. And that's the way we framed it. But I'm looking at it thinking, and that always was a bit contrary to what parent, once the child is grown, what parent says, I'm going to test you constantly. That it just doesn't make any sense. It's like, what's the point of that? So we have to conceptualize why is it framed like that? I think probably to keep us on our toes, you could say, because if you don't feel there's a test and it's not important, then why bother? Why commit? If you don't think it's salvational, you might not be here because you're thinking, I'm here because I don't want to go to hell. So that's fear is a huge motivating factor for people when they first come in. But God wants us to move from a place of love. And it says perfect love casts out fear. So what is this whole testing, the way we talk about the test? So I don't think it's a really helpful model to keep saying we're being tested on an individual level. And now we're shifting into the institution. I think that's a better model. So the institution is being tested, but it's not an individual thing. And the test is really the great controversy. It's the whole going back to the beginning where Satan says, this government is not fair. This leader is a dictator. We don't want this government. We don't like God. You're not fair. And I can do it better. So this whole controversy is over. How good is the law and governance of God? And we are now learning what that is, how to practice it properly. And then we can say, we agree with God. And not because God's saying you're going to burn if you don't agree, but because we actually intellectually and experientially know that's the right thing to do and want to do it willingly. So it's not because we're being tested and we're going to be lost if we don't. So what God wants us to have is faith that when we do it right, that when we buy into the institution and we practice equality properly, then why wouldn't it be a success? It is a success. It's successful today. Every day is a success if we have the right model. And so what would make it a failure? If every single person here capitulated and said, I don't want to do it, and walked away, then we wouldn't have an ark. If Noah and his family had walked away and said, we're not getting on board, there's nobody in it. So there's a choice at every step that you have to be part of this. But that's your mechanism of being saved. That's the success. So it's not an individual test, it's a test for the movement to get it right. But when we see it now intellectually, we are making it right. We're getting it right if we practice what we've been told and what we've learned already. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Was mine.
It was Effie's. I thought
It was mine.
Oh, it was Joyce.
But the question didn't
It's
come
got from
from
mine. Okay.
the question didn't come from an individual standpoint. The question from the beginning was from a movement standpoint.
Okay.
Yes, you know that from the structures that ours is a line of success. So the question was as a movement, because we know that there are tests in every dispensation. So then the tests, of course, are for the movement, not for individuals. So the question was, what's the point of the tests if success is guaranteed?
So what's the point of the test? It's let's look at it a different way. Was equality a test? So you could say, yes, it was a test. But why did we need this information? What was it for? It was to give us knowledge of who God was and how God's kingdom operates, to correct our mistakes. So this is really, it's not really a test, it's a correction. So each step, God is correcting. And if we're willing to be corrected and we're humble and teachable and we say, oh, you're right, that makes sense, I'm going to do that, then it's not a test. It's quite easy. If you come to it saying, I don't want to do that, I don't want to change my position, I don't like what we're saying, then it becomes a test for you. But on another level, it's just God has to give us certain amounts of information so that we can be fitted to do the job that is required to be done. So I feel like we need to reframe this whole idea that we're being tested as we go. Yes, it can become a test, but God's not doing it to test us. God's doing it because God wants us to understand more about God and who they are and how they operate, and say, come into closer relationship. Let's go. Let's learn about this, and then you need to learn about this because you need to know how not to do it. And then let's establish how to do it together. And we're doing that as a collective. And there's something about us working that out for ourselves. So we're in a process of growth, I think. That's what I would say, rather than test. So we've got the test model, but we've also got the plant. And the plant doesn't say, why are you testing it at every level? It just keeps growing. And then finally it produces fruit, because that's what a plant does. And so if we're in the right place, in the right environment, we can just keep growing, and we'll keep on growing here. So somebody asked a question, which I was going to link, I guess it links to this concept, which is, why do people say there won't be any work, or something about work past the closure of probation? I had it written down, so haven't quite got it in front of me. But I think, I'm not sure where you got that concept that we're not doing any work after the closure of probation. I guess it might be to do with the fact Michael stands up and something changes. But from what we know about these lines, is that every step we get an increase of knowledge and a new understanding that we grow into. And I don't think that's going to stop here or beyond the second advent. So I think even after the second advent, we'll probably have increase of knowledge and formalization, maybe. But even if we don't say that structure on a line, we might. I think that's going to be the process, because human beings are built to learn and grow. So we're not going to stop learning and growing. And I don't think that's going to stop here. So we know enough about our way up to know there's an increase of knowledge and a formalization here. And we talk about the priests starting their work in, the 30 years, 2019, the priests are now ready at this close of probation to do a work. And if we say that for the priests on a fractal level, then I don't see why it's any different that some, at this point, perhaps we're ready to do a different work now at the close of probation. And maybe that's what the close of probation is marking, that we've reached a certain stage as a movement where we're now fit for purpose. And that's perhaps a different way of seeing the close of probation. Rogers.
So I have concerning it was there are movement of success. Success is guaranteed. My question, so we say there are movement of success. If that success guaranteed, the answer is no. It's not guaranteed. If everyone in this movement, everyone we know it, the whole world, they reject this message and walk away. It's nothing that will happen. That's we have to do it again.
Yeah.
And start all over again. So the success is not guaranteed, because the institution needs the people to carry out what you're expecting, the culture that God has set in place. So God believe that God is going to get enough people who will go along with the culture that we have set in this kingdom, so that he can use this as an example and show the fairness of their kingdom. So it's not, if we can say institution and people are separate, this institution is not self-executing.
No.
It needs people to practice the culture that this institution is leading. So I believe the idea of the great test comes in, because you say, what is it that shows we have become successful? One is the methodology, the other one is the message. So I see that the idea of the great test is connected with the message. And this message is what defines the culture of this institution.
Yeah. So, I was thinking it's a bit like this argument about predestination and then foreknowledge. So if God can see all the people that are going to be saved, or knows what's going to happen, isn't that making it happen in some way? But we've still all got choice at every step. Just because God might know what happens doesn't mean God makes it happen. It's the same. God can see that this is a movement of success, and by faith we can see that it can be successful. But as Rogers reiterated, if each of us decides tomorrow to walk away, there is no movement left. So each of us has a part to play in making that successful. But in God's mercy, I think God's shown us that we are successful. So we just have to believe that, really, and keep doing the work. Well, what is it?
So there is something someone has said here, but I want to comment on it.
Yeah.
So before you explain what you explained, initially we thought success was the number of people who are coming to the kingdom of heaven. So you have many people in
kingdom of heaven, then that movement is very successful. But I want to get back to what someone said for me about the story of Noah. The story of Noah is an emblem of our movement. And we can see that there are only 8 souls. So if the success is dependent on the number of people, then that is to fail. But we know from the word of God that was a history of success. So that is a classic illustration that whatever success is does not depend on the number of people who are part of the kingdom of heaven. If God can put in place this culture, and we just find one person in the whole of this movement who will go along with that culture, that's enough for God. So God doesn't need many people. So the number of people is not a metric by which God is going to measure whether we are successful or we fail. It's not a consideration in success or fail.
No, I agree with that. Having said that, I think God has always needed a group. And that's why I guess Noah in some senses was a failure. So we maybe can say because Christ didn't come yet, but at every stage we've seen apostasy when God has always wanted a group who were on board. And I'm not saying we know how much that was, 140,000 symbolic number of the fact that this is about a group, a movement. It's not about individuals or in that sense, I think God needs a number of people to be on board to form that government. But yeah, that's perhaps a separate point. And yeah, it's not about numbers, success. Joy.
So now that it's been said that success is not a guarantee, there seem to be called studies that were done showing that whether or not we will succeed that's not a matter of contention. We will definitely succeed. The question is about the degree of success. How much will you succeed? But success is there. It's just a matter of the degree of success. So what was that about, and what is this? Success is not guaranteed. What is that about? Or are they two different subjects?
Okay. Did everyone hear that?
Yes.
Yeah. So, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I think that explanation, I believe, was not saying that this thing was guaranteed from the very beginning. I think the point is, what argument can you give to say that this movement is not going to fail? And the argument that was given is that we have come far enough for us to believe that we are going to fail. This movement is not going to fail. And so much has happened for us to now to be very sure that success is going to come.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like something that is predestined that this movement has to succeed. Is that there is so much that has been covered, and we have come to almost the end. Now we can say with surety that this movement is going to succeed.
And I think so to connect to his point about, well, if it says how successful, it depends on the degree of success. Maybe we needed that part of that's narrative, because once you think, well, it's successful anyway, with or without me, I don't have to do anything. Takes that really motivating. And one of those levels of motivation is you can make this more successful if you play your part, if you pull your weight and you work collectively together, that your part looks like. But it's going to have consequences, because the danger is that once you say something set in stone, or it's not salvational, you're not going to go to hell if you don't do it. People sit back and say, well, I don't have to bother then, I'm not worried. But there is still something you have to do. And it motivates you to say, you can make a difference still. You can, contribute to the success of this movement. But there's still a part to play. And it's a more positive motivation, perhaps, than saying, you're going to be lost if you don't. But let's do a better job. Let's do the best job we can, as opposed to sitting back and letting other people do it, which is what happens everywhere.
Maybe I remember something as well. It's about the glorious land and the seventh. So, recently, the question was asked. I know we don't discuss the family billion previous name. The political spring 2020. We have in the past said that Christ will have come in like history of the history of today.
Yeah.
But now the argument is being made. Christ will not have come in that history. Why? The US is not matured enough for it to get to a point where the seventh kingdom can be produced. But now, when you come to our dispensation, so much has happened. Now we can speak with certainty and say the seventh kingdom is here. The seventh kingdom is going to come. I think it's the same argument to say about the movement. Why are we saying we are now saying success is guaranteed, not in the sense of predestination, but that so much has happened that it's not possible for us to go backward.
Steve,
Wondering what means that why did that we come so far within possible to aid, and that the leader first in that hindsight bias, thinking back and seeing that later in that while okay without kind of while, and then thinking that was not mature enough, was looking back in that hindsight bias. And now what makes you think that we come to how we can move up? Because we see the rise up. We see regression, we see regression in a lot of things, the one when it comes to starting subjects. No whole sign, but it's regression. So what starts cycling is there?
what's your last sentence? I missed it. Sorry, the last few words you said.
What is what makes it so starting that we have really come so far and we are now mature and then without using the argument of like looking back.
Can we not look back there?
We can, but then I think like we could measure the Millerites to our history and say like the world is not mature enough. But 100 years of children could back the last and think
Yeah.
we are not mature enough.
Yeah.
So that's why what makes him think that there can't be regression, and what makes him think that we are mature enough.
So maybe my response to that is, I will give an example. The example is polarization in the United States. I've known to look at the United States pre 1989 and post 1989. There wasn't the kind of polarization in the United States pre 1989 that we saw after 1989. What that means then, some example, maybe about the fall of democracy. Pre 1989, it was very difficult for the things which are happening today. Like pre 1989, you couldn't have a Trump as a candidate of the Republican Party. It was never possible. But after 1989, because of the polarization, as an example, you can see that it's possible to have Trump as a candidate and then just make a political party and to win the presidency, something that would not have been dreamed before. So I'm saying gradual failure has built up. This failure is building up to the point now you can have someone like Trump become a candidate or get a political party. So I think that's an example of how it is.
Does that help, Steve?
Yeah,
Somewhat.
room for another discussion on that. We will go back and that one say in the past we had people like
They can, and I suppose in the past we've argued that if God's people were faithful, that things would have happened in the world that would have catapulted the end to come in some way. I don't know if we can still say that actually, because it's almost like on one hand we used to say we're waiting for God's people to be perfect or ready, and now we're saying actually God was waiting for Satan to get the kingdom right, or the perfectness of the kingdom. I think we can use Bible prophecy and say even the Millerites taught that the USA was the sixth kingdom at the end of the world. I mean, I don't know what they taught with the seventh kingdom, but we can clearly see that this is the last kingdom, I suppose, and it's never behaved in this manner. And it was the last hope for God, I guess, the glorious land. And now if the glorious land's destroyed, what hope is there for the world anyway? So I think we can see that the world has changed quite dramatically, which should give us confidence that we're the last generation. I think you could always argue, well, yeah, we could have another 100 years, some would change, or we could see more light from there. But you can also see the logic of the equality position, that can it be perfected more than it can? We can all grow in our knowledge of it, but the basic principles of love God and love your neighbour are so solid now than they ever were, I think. I think you can see it, but obviously it takes some faith anyway. Joy, did you want to?
Yes, I wanted to make a follow-up on if the proof of success is based off of looking at how far we've come. I mean, that's one, but I'm also wondering if it was not also about the structures, that is the alpha and omegas, alpha of ancient Israel, omega of modern Israel, alpha and omega of modern Israel. And then we can see failure, success, and then the alpha of the failure. So we come to a conclusion that our history, which is the omega of modern Israel, is going to be a success. So was that not one of the evidences, which would mean that success is guaranteed? Because I mean, if we fail, then the prophetic structures will not really be working.
I think so.
So success is not a guarantee. Well, it's a guarantee. I think that's where I'm stuck.
So you're saying that prophetic structures teach us that the alpha is failure and the omega is success. Then we have another alpha with the Millerites that's failure, and now that means we must be success to follow the pattern. Is it not guaranteed? At the same time, you're hearing Roger say it was never guaranteed in that sense from the beginning. But the structures teach us that by faith. I think it's a bit like saying, was Christ's sacrifice on the cross, was it guaranteed that he would be successful? And we all go, yeah, of course it was, because the whole universe would have been in jeopardy if he'd failed his mission. And we just can't even think about him failing. But it wasn't guaranteed, was it? At any point, he could have said, I'm not doing this. But because we're in a position now where we look back and say, but we know he didn't, he wasn't going to. It's like, it's kind of contrary. I think it's a similar thing that you could say, well, before Christ came, the Godhead knew that it was going to be a success because they could see the end from the beginning. But in Christ's humanity, how much did he know? If he's going to be like us, it's by faith, isn't it? It's by faith on the structures, on the methodology, or the teachings he's had, that he's the Lamb, and that the Lamb he somehow knows is going to resurrect. I mean, how does that? How did Christ know that? Brian Rogers, lots of hands, Brian.
I just wanted to say, I don't think it's different.
You don't think it's
Yeah, I don't think it's so harmful to say beforehand that our history is successful. Yeah, because it's the same thing you see in Daniel 2. There's prophecy even there. And Daniel was already like given a vision or prophecy of what will happen.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is that now we can explain why we think our history is successful. So it wouldn't be just saying that we are a successful history. And I think now, like connecting with what Rogers was saying, we have reasons to why we believe our history will be successful. Because of the 3 points, the message, the methodology, and the organization. So I don't think it's harmful to say, maybe to use compare and contrast, liken our history to that of Christ, and conclude and that our history will be successful. I don't think it's harmful.
Maybe to comment. The example you're given about Jesus is a very good one. Someone could say it was guaranteed that Jesus was going to succeed. But if you read Pierre, it says it was it says something like fear for reason. Is God was risking everything, say Christ to come and die on the cross. So even God wasn't sure that Jesus was going to succeed. It was a risk that God took, and just trusted that because he has always done the right thing, he's going to do the right thing. Then, as much as we have the prophetic structures, we have to take into account that the beings that God is dealing with have free will.
yes.
So if we take into account free will, then there's nothing that is guaranteed. Also, another example I could give, there is a quotation from Ellen White, which says that sin can never happen in heaven again. Like I'm in depth with that in 2017. We challenged people and say it's possible for sin to happen. Why are you saying it won't happen?
Yeah.
Because people will be having free will. So it's only that God has had a history with these people who are going to heaven and trust that they will continue doing the right thing as much as they did the right thing when they were here.
Yes.
So because of the aspect of free will, I don't think there is anything that is guaranteed.
No. But from what you're saying, God has confidence that this people know God well enough to not make that mistake again, because they've got enough information to keep heaven sinless in that sense, not to cause the damage that we've already seen down here.
Same example. Why is God so sure
Yeah.
that Job is going to make the right choice when Satan takes everything from him? Because God has had an experience with Job for 2,000 steps, and in each step, Job did the right thing. So God believed that Job has done the right thing 2,000 times. This time around, he's not going to do something wrong. So it's just the trust and belief he has because of Job has been doing the right thing. He also did the right thing this time around.
Oh, sorry, there was another hand up. Snyder.
I think what the Rogers has mentioned, I think the very nature of how God is reflects the very nature of how we are.
Yes.
And I think that nature and the evidence of it is just a reason and judgment. Is evidence that there's nothing for sure. Because even the creation of human beings, why would God create human beings and then put a blood on the judgment if he was really sure that they're not going to fail? And I think the evidence of the will being there in human beings makes things not as certain. But I don't think it removes of the experience that we are supposed to have in at least with success or with righteousness. I don't think it takes away from that experience.
And following on from what
Really confidence in our experience.
so say that last bit again. Say the last bit again. Sorry, I missed it because I was speaking.
Yeah, I'm saying that the evidence of free will
Yeah.
does not take away our experience in terms of righteousness and success. I think it builds into it.
And it makes it more powerful, really, because we're choosing to do right, to do it correctly. And we have that privilege of being able to choose. And that kind of brings into question, like you just said, that God has the same character. I was thinking about when Rogers was speaking, does that mean that God has that power of choice just like we do? And if God has no guarantee really that Jesus would actually succeed, it was a risk. There's no risk if they're definitely going to make a success of it. So if there's a risk, it means there is a possibility of failure. So I think I conceptualize, maybe we conceptualize that because God is love, God can't operate in any other way outside of that. But that's a very simplistic picture. So God chooses to operate in love all the time and will not step out of that boundary, but does have a choice, which is quite something. The Godhead, if they're like us, must have free will and choice. They're not forced to be loving and practical quality. That's a choice they've made based on, I don't know what based on. We could say based on their nature and their character, but they've got a lot of experience through the ages past that we don't know about, obviously. Yeah. That's
Me, progress is about like the supposed to settle.
prophecies about
Like
likelihood.
the strength that shows that Omega is success is based on likelihood that success. As opposed to success. I don't think that's what actually. I think that's what especially is the comment listening. Like this moment, before you can like this but you can learn what back in real time as we participate in this.
Yeah. And so I think you could argue that, well, maybe if that means the Ninevites' history had to be a failure because Moses was a failure, that history was a failure. Does that mean the Ninevites have to be a failure? I don't think so necessarily. Or we could argue now with the Seventh Kingdom model that kingdom was already, it was the height of perfection. So from that aspect, it wasn't going to finish anyway. But I don't think it's, as you say, it's a guarantee just because that structure said that, because then we have a different structure teaching us something different if they're successful. I don't think we have to repeat the mistakes of the past based on the strength.
Now, the Millerites, I think some people now believe the Millerites is better. It's great for India. Well, the give us this history where they made their they reach where their effort is. Their percentage, whatever they were needed. And then they decided to price coming up because of that. Because they have been something that in their time and trying to come up. Yes. And that is that precious now, most of the things that you, especially in the prophetic structures, what they mean was because I know what is especially what people are partying at the Bible, they say Christ will have not come because of imaginary thing. That you and I got to make us to today maybe realize you are not trained as we thought. Because it tries to build up therefore they don't have faith as well.
Dennis.
So
Oh, time's up, sorry. We'll just keep carrying on. Last point, can you make the last point? No. Samir says no, sorry, Dennis. Sorry, she'd be trying to signal me that to stop and everything. Okay, all right, thank you for your participation. I'm sure we have, maybe we have another Q&A. Maybe that's the last one. Maybe we have to have another one. I don't know. Let's close with prayer. Dear loving God, we thank you that this message stimulates us to ask lots of questions. We thank you that you are there and that we have each other to answer these questions, that we can wrestle these things out and work through them. And it motivates us to keep going and growing as we learn from one another. Pray now that as we separate for the evening, that you would be with each one of us, give us a good night's rest, and bring us safely back tomorrow so we can discuss these things further. We thank you and we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.